All right, so this video, this is probably the biggest concept that you'll work with for this project is thinking about how to take your website that you've made to this point and making it mobile friendly or friendly for a tablet or different screen sizes really. And the whole point is really considered responsive web design. And this is a much greater topic than we're really going to get into. But for Web3, you're going to kind of get a taste of how to make your site mobile friendly and work better on different screen sizes. Now, you don't have to do a ton, but there are a number of other concepts that we're going to really touch on here. But it's again another one of those. At this point, come find one of us if you're really interested in kind of learning more. But you'll be able to make your website mobile friendly and look better on different screen sizes by doing what we're going to do in this video. Okay. Now, the biggest thing is you can go check this out. Obviously, you can go on your phone and see what websites look like. But the responsive part is really just that. It's when we scale down the browser window or the size of the screen that we're using, the device, you see the website change, right? And the Boston Globe has been a responsive website for a long time. So you can kind of get a sense of what a newspaper's website does. You can kind of see there's 1, 2, 3 columns, but when we start to get into more of like a portrait tablet size, we get just 2 columns. And then when we start to get to a smartphone size, we get 1 column. And then when we really get down to a smaller size, we start to see just 1 column, right? The map gets bigger and everything goes to 1 column and stacks on top of each other. Okay, and this is responsive design. We're making it responsive to the device screen resolution that we're working with. Now, the cool thing about this is it's all done with CSS, right? So it's a clever way of doing things with CSS to essentially take our styles that we have for the desktop, and then when it scales down, we change and override styles that we've already written. Okay, so we start to think in terms of percentages instead of pixels. So if we said this was like 50% and this was 20% and this was 30%, it adds up to 100. But then when we scale it down and it gets to that first what's called a breakpoint, when it gets to a breakpoint right here where it goes from 3 to 2, now our columns are like 50 and 50, right? So we're working with percentages instead of just saying it's 500 pixels wide or something like that. Okay. Now, if that doesn't make complete sense, that's fine. That's just a little taste of what we're getting at. But on the site that we're building, the one that we've been working through, we have just a couple breakpoints, right? So there's one, well, I guess there's only one breakpoint, one major breakpoint. We have when it starts to get into the smartphone sizes. So we see we have 2 columns here, and then all of a sudden we go to 1 column, and you notice up here at the top we do the same thing with our menu. Instead of having them 2 columns, we have it go to 1 column. We actually add some padding on the top so that way it gets our little logo there and all that kind of stuff. So the best way to approach this, and there's lots of different ways to go about it, but the best way to approach it is really just go on your browser and start scaling down. And when it starts to look bad, or when something starts to look weird or off, that's when we want to add a breakpoint, right? So right here, we're starting to get, this column's looking pretty skinny, and we could probably say we need a breakpoint, somewhere out here more, but we added one right here, right? So it's getting pretty skinny here, so we want to add one right here, okay? Now the way you can do this is inside of Chrome, when you right-click and go to Inspect, if we have the Inspect or the Developer Tools out, we can actually scale down, and you can see in the top right corner up here, we get a pixel width, all right? So we can actually see what pixel width we want to have a breakpoint at. And that'll make sense here in a sec when we actually do this, but that's important, right? We need to know where we want to break it, like at what size do we want to make a change. Okay, so that's a little bit about just responsive design. So now let's jump into our HTML and CSS to actually get a sense of how we actually do that here. Okay, So before we kind of go into the CSS, the biggest thing we need to add, and it's not real apparent, and it's something that can kind of trip you up if you don't get it. So this part right here is really important. There is a viewport that we need to add to our HTML. So working in our HTML, and we're going to add it to both the index and the work, the ones that we've been working on. Okay, so we need to add it to both. So right under the title, I'm going to add this code, and I'm going to kind of pause here, and you can pause the video, but we need to add this line right here. Okay, it will essentially just keep the scale, so that way we have what we need to keep that initial scale at 100%, so that way when we start to scale it down, it knows what we're actually asking it to do with our CSS. Okay, so we need the viewport. We don't need to go into like what each little line is. We just need that line there. So then do that and make sure you put it on your work as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save the index. And what this does, it'll work on the browser without this line, but when you go to a mobile device, that's when it starts to break. You won't see the changes. Okay, so we have that. Now we're going to go into our style sheet. Now I've added this little bit, so I'm going to kind of like leave it there so you can kind of see it. I'll zoom in a little bit. This is what's called a media query. A media query is essentially how we can work with different sizes screens in our CSS. All right. Now we're doing something that would be considered like working with the desktop first and then going down to mobile. You'll hear a lot of people say we want to design websites mobile first. And there's a lot of reason why you would want to do that. But to start off with, I found it easier to design for the desktop so you know it works. And then when you scale it down, you actually see what it looks like. So I found it easier with students to start off with that way. So we have all of our CSS up above. So, you know, we're not going to talk about that. That's all the stuff that you can create and that you're going to do. One thing I am going to do just to be able to change stuff is we have on the main area, we have a background color of white. Okay, so this is the CSS part. It cascades down from the top and it loads styles as it goes down the list. Okay, so what we're going to do is at that breakpoint, just so we can see it work, we have the main area, or the main tag that we're going to work on, and then the background color is what we're going to change. Okay, so I'm going to go down here at the bottom and I'm going to just type in regular CSS, right? And you kind of notice that it kind of is CSS. It's called media queries. It's got a selector, and then it's got open and close brackets, and then I'm going to type in main, open and close brackets, and then I'm going to change the background color to red, just so we can see something happen. Now I want to pause here too so you can kind of see that as well. Here we have the open of the media query and the close of the media query. Inside of here we have as much CSS as we want to write. So we could actually write out more styles inside of here that are overriding the styles up above. Okay? And what this is saying is at the maximum width of 600 pixels, so really anything less than 600 pixels, is going to have these styles, right? And we need to essentially find them up here or add new ones down here to get it to show up. Right, but we're going to save this and we're going to just check it out really quick and see how we did. So it looks the same starting out, but when we scale down and we get to that 600 mark, we should see something change, right? We get a red color for that background of the main area, and then we have a green text that changed the paragraph color, right? So what that tells us is we know right here at this breakpoint, 600 pixels, this is where all those changes we want to have made, we can make them there. Okay? So this is where I'm going to like kind of leave it on you to kind of try this stuff out. And you saw what it looked like earlier. Like you can stack things, so you can essentially tell these to be not in line, right? So up above we actually wrote them to use flex and do some other things so that the way they're side by side. You can essentially reverse that and tell it not to be side by side, and that allows you to stack things on top, and then you can add some padding at the top or the bottom to actually give some space for a logo if you have one, or if things are really crowded, on the mobile device. When they stack, you can add padding at the top and the bottom, and all that stuff we've talked about with the box model. So this is where you kind of get to try things out to really fine tune it, not only for the desktop, so write as much CSS for the desktop as you need, but then you can also override any CSS at breakpoints, right? Now, I should say you can have as many media queries as you want. I usually start large and go small. So we can say at 800, we want this to be blue, and we'll do orange spelling, and save it, right? Same kind of thing. We get blue and we get orange. So you can actually see the breakpoints, and obviously it doesn't look good. So you'll need to make it look good, but at different breakpoints you can tell it to look differently, right? And that is enough to get you going. You're really just writing regular CSS from here on out. You're just wanting to write it in a way that it looks better at these different breakpoints. Now for the project, you only need one breakpoint, but again, eyeball it, and as you see things change, or as you see things that don't look good, like I would say actually probably right here I'd want a breakpoint because that image starts to overlap here. So it's kind of up to you, and it's starting to get skinny anyway, so I might actually increase my breakpoint to here, so that way anything smaller actually looks the way I want it to. And you notice that if it gets really small, my name starts to stack, so I might want to make this smaller font size and that sort of thing. Okay, so it's something to think about and something to play around with, but come ask us with questions if you have them. But this is where you really can kind of make your site work on lots of devices moving forward.